Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to tell you about the guidelines that we developed for developing climate adaptation plans in co-creation with stakeholders and the industry. So, I don't see here. So, first, for whom do we develop climate adaptation plans and guidelines, and why? How do we develop these guidelines? And also, I will talk about the impact of these climate adaptation guidelines, and then finally provide you with some conclusions and take-home messages. So, are you an aquaculture producer who is worried about how climate change may influence your production? Or are you involved in making or updating aquaculture production plans in your region or country? Anybody doing that at the moment? Sorry, the talk is for these people. But if you're a scientist, then you may actually be the knowledge provider to these processes. As the previous two speakers just provided on the economic aspects of production, that will be very relevant information when developing these climate adaptation plans. So we recently saw the IPCC report focusing more on, last time we got the climate kind of mean values, the effects of climate change, and in the recent report, a very high focus was on extreme events. And what we learned from the report is that there will be more extreme events. And of course, this will have implications for any aquaculture producer in the world. The effects of climate change are widely identified in aquaculture already. Most of these papers that we read and learn about are focusing on temperature, but if you visited the climate change section yesterday, you saw that there were quite a few also on oxygen levels, ocean acidification, and as we learned this morning, also about disease. So, and I also refer to a paper that looks into the salmon, Northeast Atlantic salmon production and climate implications, where forecast models have been done. So, we need to be prepared. And how do we prepare? Yes, we develop climate adaptation plans for either a business, for your municipality, a region, or your country. Very many countries have climate strategies developed, yet they usually don't address fish production at all, or seafood production, or aquatic production. Do you know if your country has an aquaculture development plan for climate adaptation? Hands up, anybody? What about UK? Anybody from UK? Or Uruguay? Or Canada? These are the countries who are in the forefront in developing national climate adaptation plans. So how do we get there? We have a climate adaptation guideline that is now available for everybody. We developed it in the Climefish project, where we had 7 case studies, where we kind of introduced a draft climate adaptation guideline and run it twice through these case studies, including case studies in fisheries, in lakes and ponds, but also aquaculture. And the aquaculture case studies where we applied the guideline were the Northeast Atlantic salmon production, the Galician mussel production, and finally the sea bass and sea bream in Greece. So then we kind of, in that process, when developing the guidelines, we learned what processes and steps needed to be taken on board. We also followed the principles that FAO has put up for climate adaptation in seafood production, and there is also an ISO standard for climate adaptation developed through EU. So, what approach do we then have? The first thing is that we need to scope what is the problem matter that we are, what is the entity that we are developing a plan for. So when we went to Greece and asked the stakeholders if we should work on their very business in the region, or what would the entity be, they went, we don't go for the whole country. And that was, of course, very ambitious in an EU project where we had 15 case studies. Yet both the case study leader and our programmers and forecasters and decision support tool providers were happy to provide that. And then our challenge was to ensure that we kept the stakeholders on board all the time. With stakeholders, I mean producers, managers, NGOs, and so on, depending again on what level you are. But when you do a national plan, you need to have this as an open process, making it available for everybody. And then we include the biological, environmental, production, governmental, and socioeconomic aspects. So knowledge that we've seen here today earlier might be very good to have in such an development plan. And finally, we provide very good mechanism for feedback loops, so we can kind of revisit the plan and utilize the best available knowledge, and that's where you guys come in. So, when developing a climate adaptation plan, we have three main tasks. We assess the risks and opportunities, we identify adaptation measures, and then we operationalize the climate adaptation plans. This is a rather kind of detailed process, and each of these pillars is one of these tasks. So we start with gathering the right stakeholders, we evaluate current status of the situation, hopefully we even have some biological forecasts, and we bring this information to the stakeholders to identify the main risks and opportunities. Then we go back and evaluate, assess the vulnerability, and also identify adaptation measures. So for instance, for aquaculture, risks and opportunities identified where growth rates and yields would change, perhaps even be positive in some cases. More extreme events, pathogens and algal blooms, jellyfish blooms, also rather kind of typical vulnerabilities. And the measures would be higher model resolution. At the moment, we model on the 10 kilometers precision. When you have a farm, you would like to have a 1 kilometer precision. Diversify the species and the technology. You know, Norway is very dependent on salmon. Better monitoring, of course. And then you would go to the next step, and that is agreeing on the adaptation measures and how these would then be applied. So then we operationalize tell how to implement the climate adaptation plan. And that would then include the key actors responsible, what resources to use, how to fund the activities, and the timelines, of course. Now, here we also would have to, when applying the climate adaptation plan, we also would have to include the monitoring of the performance of the plan and the final evaluation on the way. So how do we ensure impact through this climate adaptation plan? We have transformed it or translated it into a good practice recommendation for making climate adaptation plans for fisheries and aquaculture. And it is now a European voluntary standard. It's a CEN workshop agreement that was developed through a one-year process, open process, where everybody was invited to contribute. So we had actors from FAO, from South Africa and even Chile to contribute to this process. And then we have a final CEN workshop agreement adopted in May 2020. So this standard is now available on several natural SEN providers, and that's both on Norwegian platform, the German platform, Netherlands, UK, Ireland. And if you want to buy it, it's the cheapest in Estonia. It's maximum 100 euros, but the point is that the SEN offices want to keep track on who is utilizing the standard. We have also, it's referred to several times in the strategic guideline for a more sustainable and competitive EU aquaculture for 21 to 30, and this is the guide for member states when they're developing the multi-annual plans for aquaculture development. We also have it uploaded on Climate Adapt, so you can link to it there. And finally, when we are now developing the massive online course on sustainable aquaculture for low trophic species that you might have heard about yesterday when my colleague Adriana was presenting it, we have also one section there where the standard will be presented to practitioners and students. So my final conclusions, what happened here? Sorry, this was on the wrong track. So, my conclusions, this is a hands-on, flexible guide to facilitate adaptation to climate change, and it ensures systematic, time-bound, transparent, and inclusive climate adaptation plan development. It also offers risks and opportunities related measures for aquaculture. So there's a whole list that you can go through and see if it's relevant for your case. And it also now allows you to be prepared by applying this climate adaptation plan. Thank you for your attention. And now I do that.
Thank you, Michaela. Do we have any questions for Michaela regarding CAP?
Then we can gain some time.
Yeah, we have to ask something.
I can provide some information.
Yeah.
I can just tell you, for instance, in the case when we talk about the salmon, we see in the forecasts that even if the salmon is growing faster, especially in the north, that is actually an opportunity. We see that also the salmon lice will do better, so there is a trade-off. When we look into the Mediterranean mussels case, kind of fouling and red tides are the main vulnerabilities. And then, of course, what are then the different measures here? It's, of course, better monitoring. And the better monitoring also is kind of one of the main tasks for the Mediterranean when looking into sea bass and bream. While getting to the microphone, being in Norway, it's really incredible that 2 years ago we lost 20,000 tons of salmon, and we still don't have a climate adaptation plan for this industry.
Yes, Rafaela, I'm working with the IUCN, but also with some other entities, and I just worked with a consortium which is actually funded by the EU with marine protected area and resilience. Mm-hmm. And so this consortium, which is called the Ocean Governance Consortium, perhaps you know, they have adapted now a tool which is going to be, which is actually tested for MPA situation, how they are actually being adapted or facing the climate change challenges and so on. So it's an interesting tool that is actually used now in different marine protected areas on the Atlantic Ocean, but some other places too. And this tool, I was asked to start to a kind of adaptation of this tool for situation where you have marine protected areas and aquaculture productions. So I think it would be quite interesting to make a link between this this tool, which is actually available now, and perhaps your your guide could feed very much, you know, the situation where you have the coexistence of marine protected area and aquaculture within or at the proximity of the marine protected area. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice comment. I think for the Greek case, we developed a decision support tool that takes in the forecasts and provides more kind of regional advice. And I think that is the most relevant to use when you are developing or look into when you compare with your tool. The steps in the guideline may certainly be relevant whenever you develop future plans or tools for the industry.
Good morning. My name is Garasi from the Spanish Aquaculture Farmer Association, APROMAR. So I was thinking about, in Spain is extremely different to Norway. We have so many different species and different methods in aquaculture. And how would you advise us to do it? To do an adaptation plan for so many species and so many different habits and places?
I would perhaps start with the industry that is most eager, and you have the Galician case that has been led by the scientists in Vigo, and there they have already identified the vulnerabilities and the measures needed to plan for the future. And I can provide you with the details on that contact, because there the industry, Pinoza has been really active in providing the knowledge and telling us what they need to enhance their production also under climate change.
Thank you, Michaela. We have to continue.
Thank you.